Hi, welcome to Life in Real Estate. I'm here today with Kristen Wolfram. She's practicing family law in Michigan. And today we're going to talk about singles who currently own a home but are moving in together. So you're not married, but there are definitely things in this situation you need to be aware of, right? So Kristen is here to share her experience and to give you some tips on what you might want to do to avoid any challenges down the road. So, welcome.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for being here.
You're welcome.
So, tell me, I've been through a situation before with a couple of my clients, right? They're single, one owns the home, right? And a partner's moving in.
Sure.
So, in that situation, the client I had, unfortunately, the relationship didn't work out. Both had invested in the home and upgrades, etc. And unfortunately, the person that didn't own the home wasn't able to get anything after the breakup
Yeah.
legally,
So
right?
that's correct. And
Okay.
that is the current status of law in Michigan. So if you are going to invest in a home, particularly if you're going to make a sizable investment or a repeating investment, like contributing to the mortgage or something like that, there should be an agreement up front as to
Okay.
what that looks like. Because the truth is, if you're not going to be placed on the deed, and that actually, even if you're placed on the mortgage, that's going to be a separate issue. But if you're not going to be placed on the deed, you'll have no ownership interest in the house. While you are currently living there, uh, you have a right to enter the home, but as far as your investment in the property, you have no right to recoup it at all.
So really what you're saying is it whatever the deed says, whoever is on that deed has 100% ownership. So even if both ended up on the mortgage, they decide to share the mortgage, it wouldn't matter in the end.
It
Is that
would,
true?
it is true. It would not matter in the end. So the mortgage is the loan associated with the property. But if it doesn't come along with the ownership interest in the property, you can still remain liable on the mortgage, but you would not have there would be no security in the home. So there would be nothing to cash in on, nothing to get paid out on. You could just continue to be responsible for the home. So, in other words, if partner one who does own the home defaults on the mortgage, that could have financial hits to your credit or other type of mortgage implications. But you would not be able to go back and ask for the home to be sold or ask for them to pay you out for the home or anything like that.
Okay, so basically, if you agree as the partner two, say, of the partner that owns the home, to be part of that mortgage, and things don't work out, you will still be held liable for that mortgage, even if you're not on the deed,
That's correct.
right? And so, with all that said, it would seem like when you said agreement up front, is that contractual? Would you suggest some type of contract, and what might that look like?
Sure, maybe the easiest solution is actually a lease. It might seem a little strange if you're going into a living situation, particularly with a romantic partner, but it's always best to formalize it. At the very least, you could have some kind of agreement in writing. A lot of times that would suffice, but you can be a little bit more formal and frankly find probably templates and things to conform to a lease, where you can actually have the details laid out, how much you're going to pay per month and what kind of things you'll be responsible for. If it is something like a lease, that's kind of a minimum investment. Don't expect to get something back at the end of it. If you do want to, what you're trying to do is make an investment in the property, maybe if it's going to increase the value, perhaps you're flipping the home or redoing the home or renovating in some other way, you would want a return on that. If you
Right.
do, that does have to be contractual and it needs to be as specific as possible.
Okay. And would that be separate from the lease, or can all that be built into a lease? Or would you suggest, so let's say as partners, you agree to do a kitchen and bathroom renovation, um, $75,000. So would you have an agreement up front before that partner moves in that's not part of the lease, it's separate, about any cash, shared cash that is put into the home, that if things don't work out, you get a certain percentage back on the back end.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I mentioned lease, I think what I was having in mind is like, let's say you're not, you're just living in a home with somebody. Someone has a perfectly fine home, but you're going to, start residing with them. You might just have a lease that limits your liability. In other words, you wouldn't actually be expected to pay for something like the water heater going out. You would essentially be a tenant of the other partner, which again is a little weird, but
yeah. But
then
it protects your interest,
right, because then
yeah.
you're not making an investment in the water heater because you can't, it's not like you're going to collect against the water heater when you move out. So you would just have a lease, and that would be something that would be maybe appropriate if the home was, like I said, pretty, livable, and you were just going to reside there. If you are going to talk about renovation and you're going to make either an upfront contribution or you're going to contribute, like let's say partner one has a mortgage and is going to take out an equity loan in order to do this upgrade. You might say, look, I'm going to take out, $20,000. You're going to pay 50% of that monthly payment. But at the end, I also believe that this renovation is going to increase my home's value by, say, $50,000. So I'm going to give you some kind of preset percentage, that if you were to move out, I would then kind of be able, again, to recoup on that equitable value and pay it out back to you, either refund what you were paid or maybe a little above. Again, terms could be negotiable, but
right.
If you were to do that, like pay that either that monthly payment or have an upfront payment, and you decide to move out without a contractual agreement, you will receive nothing. And the law cannot help you at all because the law says that it was the property owners and your contribution to that as a gift.
Yeah. Okay. So let's say, and I guess going back to all of that for a second, most people would hesitate to get an attorney involved, right? They're going to want to try to do things on their own, which we don't suggest they do, because this can be a big deal. I mean, if you're with someone and you're contributing and you don't own that property and you have nothing in place, you could lose a significant amount of money potentially.
Yeah, and people really do. I mean, I guess just to chime in a bit, like I've had calls from people who have been in 15, like 10, 15, even 20-year relationships. In fact, I had one that was almost a 30-year relationship where the parties never married. They lived together for obviously a really substantial time. Whether, maybe sometimes one party worked, sometimes they even had children together, but over 30 years, the children were adults now, so there wasn't even a custody contribution. So it really can significantly affect someone's life.
Significant consequences potentially.
That's right.
And so you might not want to get an attorney involved. However, we would suggest you do, because you don't know what the future holds, and you do not want to be in a situation where you've made significant contributions, thinking this is a relationship that will last forever. Sometimes they don't, and you want your interest protected.
Yeah.
So I guess in this situation, we would suggest you talk to an attorney about specific details, get their advice, and get some type of agreement in place, so that each party has interests that are protected one way or the other.
From a family law perspective, a couple of things to add to that, which is, to begin with, first of all, it's usually way more affordable to engage an attorney when everyone's getting along and you can write up the document than it is to engage an attorney on the back end to solve a problem where people are no longer getting along. So I think one way to look at it is the much smaller, more modest investment up front, and talking to an attorney then can save a huge amount of investment, and usually at a time when you don't have as much money or resources available to you, because things are, you're no longer going to combine, you're actually going to separate.
And I think that's a really good point. I had a client, they moved from out of state into Michigan. They were not married. They purchased a house together in cash, and the relationship fell apart, and neither had any real recourse legally because they had purchased in cash. So there wasn't a mortgage, but there was a deed. One wanted out, one wanted to stay, but there was no agreement money changing hands when the one person wanted out. And that became a very difficult situation because, like you said, in Michigan, different maybe in other states, there were no real rights to force payment, reimbursement basically for the money that you had put down for that home.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And back to your point, if this would have been done up front when everything was good, it would have been a lot easier because on the back end, when things are not good and people are disagreeing about just about everything, it's almost impossible.
Yeah, that's right. And you can be facing a lot of situations. So in this case, we're talking again about when one partner owns a home and the other partner does not. And so the partner that does not own the home is also at risk for eviction.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So,
oh.
so that can really turn an issue.
Because the partner that owns the home has every right to do that.
That's right. And it's a little bit slower and a little bit different process than being evicted from like your own rental or for being evicted from like an apartment or something like that. But it is indeed the same process. So even if there is no lease, even if there is no agreement, you might say like, this is my home. And again, like during the time where both parties live there, that person does, like the non-owner does have the ability to access the home. I mean, even typically the police will let you back in if you get locked out. However, a like a non-official landlord, if you will, does have more resources at their disposal, so they can, once they file the paperwork, they can lock you out. They can take what are called self-help remedies that that like landlords in a typical landlord-tenant case cannot do. So they can.
So another reason for that lease being a good idea is that it protects you more because you're considered a tenant,
right,
than just maybe a contract of some sort.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not a lease.
So those two things kind of go ahead. So for instance, someone might be listening and say, well, again, this person is just, I'm just going to move in. We're not doing any significant investments. I don't necessarily need anything from the home. I don't need to make a contract. Okay, but then consider a lease, because if you do not have some written agreement, you can be evicted. And so people might think, well, if I don't have a lease, I can't be evicted. Not true.
That's not true.
So yeah,
because do the courts see that like now you're basically in someone else's property?
That's right.
Even if you don't have a lease, you're still someone else's property that doesn't want you there. Yep. So either way, eviction can happen.
That's right.
But without the lease, it could probably happen a bit easier and quicker.
It happens differently, but it still happens. Yeah. Right. So there's some different time frames put in place when you have a lease, when you are in what's called what you would call a traditional landlord-tenant relationship. But if you do not have a lease, then there's some different time frames that are involved. I want to say it's like 30 days versus maybe less than that. But at the end of the day, I'm not a landlord-tenant expert. But that said, it will still happen. You can be taken to district court. You'll have an opportunity to kind of argue, but saying, well, all my stuff is there is not going to be a convincing argument.
And those are just additional costs.
Yes.
So now you're paying potential court costs if you get evicted, and now you have to find the resources, the money, another place to live. Yeah.
On the other person's timeline.
On the other person's timeline.
That's right.
Exactly. And so, moral of the story is to get a lease, some type of contract that protects your interests and your partner's interests. You both want your interests protected, but don't not do anything, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that the moral of the story?
Yeah.
Do it. Don't not do anything, because you don't know what the future holds. And better to be safe than sorry.
Yeah, do something. And then certainly an attorney, particularly someone, you don't even necessarily need a family law attorney, who sometimes family law does have a little bit higher rates. You could talk to someone who does landlord tenant, and sometimes that's available at a little bit of a lower rate. And you just have them tell you what is the appropriate, measure to have in place for you. Is it a lease? Is it a contract? Is it some kind of combination of the two? Is there, just what's appropriate for your situation? And then at least everyone can fall back on that, rather than, like I said, having to resort to using the court process, which is a bit of a blunt instrument.
Yeah, for sure. Quick question. Does it matter if these partners have children together?
Yes and no.
Okay.
It can matter because even without a marriage, a custody case can involve ensuring that one or the other partner does have a place to live, to reside with the children.
Okay.
That's probably significantly more complicated and maybe a whole nother
Another whole
a whole
podcast.
other session.
Okay.
But yes, so there can be a lot of implications when there are children. Does it change my advice on getting something, some kind of agreement ahead of time? Absolutely not. In fact, it makes it more important because you can have things like something I like to call eviction by PPO. So let's say there's, you know, a situation where there's an actual maybe domestic dispute, and if the police are called and a PPO gets involved, one party could be excluded from the property, even if they're the owner of the property. So in that case,
Yeah.
if partner A is the owner of the property, but partner B files a PPO, and again, those can get very complicated as well. But if that's the case, even the owner can be excluded from the property if the other person who resides there and the children are still residing there. So
This
yeah.
can all get really complicated.
Yeah, certainly children are going to make it much messier and definitely change because it's no longer sort of in the realm of property. It's yeah, with a
Now
little
it's a
bit of
whole
custody
different
mixed in.
situation.
That's right.
I didn't mean to bring that up, but I did think it was kind of important, and we
Yeah,
will delve into that in another session. Is there
more on
anything
that later.
else you would like to say about this particular subject?
Um, I guess the only thing that I'll say is that some of it sounds a little bit out, like it seems like it should be a little outdated, given the fact that, you know, lots of people live together without being married, certainly a lot more than in the past. But this case law was updated as recently as, I want to say, within the last 2 years.
Oh,
So
wow.
as recently as 2 years ago, someone tried to sue the other person, the owner of the home, for their interest for a payout in some level. They had documents and text messages, promises from the other party that they would not, you know, leave them without, and things like that, and ultimately decided to leave them high and dry. That person took it all the way up to the Court of Appeals, and the Court of Appeals affirmed the status of the case law. In other words, decided that no, that's right, the non-owner received nothing despite all these documented promises. So don't rely on promises. Again, it's easier to talk to somebody ahead of time, talk to an attorney beforehand, and get those promises in the proper form of writing, because at the end of the relationship, those promises are not going to carry any water. And that is up to date information within the, like I said, last year or two, and I don't foresee that changing.
All right. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.